All right, everybody, welcome and welcome to our guest, Johnny, today. Thank you so much for being here on the Feminine Frequency podcast. It is such an honor to have you here. Johnny has been a mentor in my life, and he has had a beautiful impact on many, both men and women. And I'm bringing him here today to really speak into the divine masculine and talk about polarity from not only a male perspective, but someone who really practices this in his own world and teaches this in his practice with his patients. And I wanted to say welcome.
Thank you, Amy. Great to be here.
Yeah.
One of my favorite topics.
I know this one's going to be an easy one, a flowy conversation, which I'm looking forward to. So, Johnny, we're going to start today. I'd love to hear, what do you do for play in your life? How do you incorporate play?
Good question. Love movement. All different styles of movements, martial arts, kind of being out in nature. Dance really ties into polarity. Big fan of tango. So all of that stuff is super, super rich and fun and playful for me. Also love traveling. I was recently in Tulum, and then end of last year I was in Bali in Australia. So those things bring me great joy and allow me to really experience the flavors and textures and culture of life.
Beautiful. I was just going to ask, what does play feel like for you?
Yeah. Super fun, joyful, flexible, pleasurable, free.
Yeah, and I think that play is really an energy. It's something that I see within you, even just it's got like a really joyful characteristic to it. It's very light, and I even see you in your body sometimes when you're very joyful. It'll be like you're swaying side to side or just really feeling that pleasurable feeling, which is really fun.
Totally.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, travel is definitely one of my favorite forms of play, and I've been really exploring this idea of play, of it being this space where we have no responsibility, where there's that childlike curiosity and wonder, and where the heaviness of responsibility and the to-do list and all of that is just not present during that time, where we can be in a space or either an activity or an experience where that stuff can fall away, and where we can just be present in our natural state of joy.
What are some things that what are some ways you like to play?
Oh, for me, it's definitely dancing. I feel the most free and alive when I'm dancing. And I feel travel for me when there is no agenda, when it's in flow, and where I'm just getting to explore and be present with what's in front of me. Yeah. So
I feel like that's an important question and come from that we have essential access to, especially with the deep work that we do with people in groups. I think it's important that I always stay in contact with that, even when working with the trauma process, that I can feel my own groundedness and lightness and kind of the essential joy of life. For me, it's a really important foundation that I always keep contact with. And then if I've lost that in some way, then that's kind of one of my metrics for kind of staying in my center and staying in my north.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week on the podcast with Melissa Catherine, and we talked a lot about how when people get super deep into personal development or doing the inner healing, that it can often take that sense of joy and playfulness away. And it's interesting because the purpose of doing all of this work, the purpose of doing this healing, is to come back to more of a sense of happipiness and joy and peace within.
Totally. Yeah, and even in a couples context, I work with couples, and I think, I think about it like we have when we come together as a couple, we have a certain amount of relational chi that we together kind of put in the pot. And, either when one or both of us get really closed down, it doesn't allow the joy and the love and the energy and the play to circulate. And also if we're sometimes, we have to use sometimes there's a phase in our life where we're really doing a lot of healing in relationship, But that can also really use up a lot of the juicy energy that we would use for polarity and passion and epic sex and like fun and joy and laughter. So I think it's again an important context that I always try to keep in mind. Like, am I like, can I feel that joy no matter what's happening?
Yeah, and I think that can ebb and flow, and I definitely that in my partnership that I when we have that joy and that playfulness, like that's to me the purpose of being in partnership. Like, yes, it's the deep work and it's the learning about yourself and healing old patterns. And right
Yeah.
now, I'm reading the book "Getting the Love That You Want" from, or "How to Get the Love That You Want," and it's based on Imago theory,
Margot, yeah,
right?
yeah,
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 which is what you work with a lot. So, but yeah, just like that stuff's obviously part of relationship too. But for me, relationship gets to add to your life and add joy and pleasure and play. And I think the traditional model of relationship, we get so serious. It's like as soon as there's this like commitment to one
yeah,
another, that it can oftentimes get serious and lose the joy
yeah,
from it.
yeah. And yes, agreed. And I think I always try to come from a developmental context. Like, I think there's a, and it's all okay, inner child, okay, teenage, but like there's a way in which I can be in my kind of teenager and sort of not attuned to you and not sort of handling responsibilities in my life. And then I'm still really being playful. Um, and then there's sort of a move up from that where I'm starting to take responsibility and I'm starting to do deeper inner healing. And so in my experience in the beginning of that phase, that's when it's easy to kind of get too serious. So it's important, it's called the pre-trans fallacy. Like, it's important not to confuse like, oh, that person lost their joy, because in a way that's actually a better developmental move, but they just need to make sure they keep going and then do their healing and then bring that joy back. And so what I find is then you get to a place where like that joy is again the essential, but you have included the responsibility, you've included like being able to be considerate of myself and others, and it's all included and integrated.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I love most about the work that you do is it's both energetic, but you have a lot of frameworks that you teach, and I'd love for you to share a little bit so that the listeners can really connect to your story and how you got here before we dive into any of these frameworks deeper.
Sure, sure. What would you like to know in specifically?
I would love to know more about how, like, your interest and intrigue in polarity specifically, and then also this paradigm of the evolved masculine and integrating all of these different parts of yourself.
Sure, sure, sure. Um, I'll start actually a little earlier with as a teen, I kind of had a dual life. Like, I had this profound experience at 16, and then I didn't know how to integrate it into the rest of my life. So I had this secret spirituality, and I was reading different spiritual traditions on the side, and it was a very private thing, and it definitely wasn't integrated into my life. And I was sort of starting to ask deeper questions. And then as part of that, I believe the universe kind of gave me a wake up call through a serious injury that after a failed surgery left me. Um, it was 4 years in total, but 2 years completely florid. And at the worst point, 22 hours a day, I could only stand for 5 minutes. Super, super intense.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting to see what the universe will provide, and sometimes it's the opposite of what we think it will provide, but to
Right.
really have that space of pain to be able to then start the healing process.
Totally. I Now that I've metabolized all the pain, I look back at that like with so much beauty. It's like the Rocky montage of movies, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a time where I left the house like 10 times in a year, and I 3 days woe is me, and then I'm like, I don't want to be around myself, let alone those few people that are kind of taking care of me. So I was like, I don't know what, but I'm going to just come from the mindset that this happened for some reason that I don't yet understand, and I'm going to make the best of it. So I started meditating. I just read and read and read and read, and I was doing physical therapy and strengthening, rebuilding myself. And so at the, you know, little by little, it got better and better. And then that was just the catalyst that really transformed my life. And I remember there was a time when I was sort of saying, I don't know if I'm going to ever get better or recover, but because the failed surgery was pretty intense. But if I do, I want to really make the most of my life. And I think that's that stream is something that's continued now 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, powerful. So I actually don't think I knew that part of your physical healing journey that
Yeah.
brought you to more of reconnecting with your spirituality. And I'm curious to know from that experience of pain, you talk a lot about presence and being present in the current moment. And I've been on one of your meditation retreats, and there's definitely a whole range of modalities that I didn't even really know existed. And I've been meditating for 2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
So, can you share a little bit more about your meditation practice and how you teach presence with your clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually ended up writing a book on it. It took 2.5 years, and the title is Embodying Presence.
Mm.
And I think I'm really like, there's a deep curiosity of life and deep curiosity of our humanity, and again, always this context of the evolutionary process, the developmental process that we're all part of. Um, so I really honor the ancestors who have kind of paved the way, and then also honor what a special time it is to be alive right now, with so much, access to information, access to meditations, access to spiritual wisdom, access to healing, that I think is a really rapid accelerated phase for humanity, and as individuals and the collective. So
Mm.
that's my come from there.
Mm-hmm. And
With
your current practice, what does that look like?
Yeah, and so how that's informed my current practice, it's allowed me to explore different kind of traditions and sort of glean the kind of the best practices from those different traditions. Um, my original meditation practice, like for 8 years, I was just sitting, and I was getting to relaxation, and I didn't know, like I thought that was like I'm doing good. I'm like meditating, right? But I didn't even know there was a map. And so the Tibetans, for example, you got to think of the climate and the way that it impacted them. But like they would sit around in caves and they'd do a meditation, and then they'd all dialogue about it and get really specific about the phenomenology and the felt experience of their states. And so in that, they would help each other out. And so, somebody might be getting to relaxation, and then their buddy's like, oh, well, if you do this one little thing, and then it'll take you to a whole nother level of expansiveness. And so then the next meditation they try it, and they're like, oh my God, I'm getting that, right? Or one of the guys is like, oh, I'm getting drowsy. And so he's like, okay, do this little thing. And then, oh my God, wow. And so the Tibetans really evolved this sort of map of the meditation states. And so I had been meditating 8 years. And then in 2011, I went to a meditation retreat at Esalen, which is an amazing property if you've not been. And so, you know, they had this map, and I was like, oh my God, I'm really like, I'm barely just getting a couple of notches on this thing to relaxation. And so just in one day, I made more progress than in 8 years of daily practice. And what was even more significant is there were some newbies in the class, and they made almost just as much progress as I did because of the potent energetic container of the group, and because of the pointing out instructions. And so I think that really evolved my how I looked at like state development in meditation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. After 8 years, just scratching the surface, I can imagine there might have been some form of like frustration in a way, like what have I been doing? But to
Totally. A little bit of that, and then a little bit of like, oh my, so grateful.
mhm.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I experienced when I went on your meditation retreat. Was just like, wow, there's so much more to this. Yes, meditation
Mm-hmm.
is beautiful in its own, but then like with the deeper layers of awarenesses
Mm-hmm.
and practices. And I've actually been thinking a lot about this of the power of working with a mentor. Like you can read stuff in a book and you can try stuff on your own. I feel like working with a mentor to be able to have dialogue around what's working and
Mm-hmm.
what's not working, and to get support, and or being in a support group of some sort with like-minded people, the power of evolving together instead of
Yeah.
just having this like solitary isolated practice.
Sure. And I think you and I've talked about this specifically, that it's common for the beginnings of personal development to be sort of like information digestion and like just ravenously taking in books and podcasts, and it's kind of mental learning. And then at a certain point we're like, oh, okay, oh, it's about embodiment. Oh, okay, I like, how do I find those capacities and skills in myself, in my daily life, especially when things are challenging? And so I think then once that happens, then people start to seek out, like the group training programs you've been participating in, and then working with mentors to really embody some of these skills and some of these ways of being.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. And I want to talk about that distinction about the difference between intellectualizing and embodiment. So
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe the difference between the two?
To take a simple example of integrity, like I can read about integrity, I can Google integrity, and then I can recognize the definition of it, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can apply that in my life. And so to apply that in my life means that my words and actions are in alignment with my values. So if I said I was going to do something, then then I'm taking action on that. And so I really honor my word, and then life tests me and gives me opportunities to kind of apply that and sort of really develop quality. So that would be an example.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. And I think for the listeners, a simple example also is one of gratitude. Like you can, in your mind, know what gratitude is, or you can think of gratitude, yet when you're not actually feeling that and embodying gratitude, when it's more of like a checklist thing, like I did that, right?
Totally.
Versus like actually experiencing the feeling of gratitude, which for me is like tears coming to my eyes at
Yeah,
times when it's like this, when I'm in awe, or like actually feeling the elevated vibrational frequency in your body because you feel so grateful for something. It's a very different experience, and it has a very different outcome or result in your life when you start to embody a
totally.
lot of these practices.
Totally. I really work a lot with role playing in states because I think that's one of the most potent ways to embody something. And so, sometimes I'll have clients and they'll say, yeah, yeah, I do a gratitude list. And my spidey sense is like, well, they're just checking it off and it's a mental thing. So good, right? That's nice that at least they're not being like ingrateful and complaining. But and then I'm like, okay, let's do an experiment. And so I'll model it first and then I get them to do it. And so I show them two scenarios and I say, okay, what do you sense is what's happening? And so I get a journal and I'm writing and I'm just being mental, and my heart's shut down, and then I'm mentally thinking about those things, right? And then second round, I'm like not writing and I'm just like, and it's a transmission of gratitude.
Smiling.
And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, okay. So if I add that to the practice, if I add that to my writing it down, I actually feel it and registered in my body.
Yeah. So people who couldn't see him on the video, he was like feeling gratitude in his body and feeling like his face, you could just feel the energy of gratitude from him. So
Yeah.
yeah, really powerful difference between the two. Yeah, so I'd love to have you share a little bit more in your definition and your experience of polarity, like just the basics of what is polarity and why is it so important for individuals and also in relationships.
Mm-hmm. So yes, absolutely. I want to first preface that by saying, um, gratefully, we live in a time where there's a lot more acceptance of race and culture and sexual orientation and gender identity. So I want to start from the foundation that like there's a whole spectrum and it's all welcome and all okay. Um, I also want to say like there's not a right or wrong way, and polarity is one of the things in relationship that's most affects sexual attraction. So like you could have a couple and they're like, yeah, I don't want to do this, I don't care, and that's a choice, that's okay. It may affect their sexual attraction, so just know that we come from acceptance, and this is one of the factors that most affects sexual attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, I also want to make three distinctions. Again, we're just kind of like painting the picture, especially for people who are just hearing about polarity, people who have been triggered by it and don't fully understand it, or even those who have been steeped. It's nice to sometimes have some distinctions. So I want to distinguish biology, which is genitalia and hormones and brain. Like there are biological differences between male and female. Okay. Both are equal, but there are differences. Secondly, there is man and woman, and that's the thing that most gets us in trouble. Those are constructs, meaning those are made up mental beliefs and sort of lenses and filters on which we look at the biology or the gender energies. And so those are the things where it's like, oh no, be a man, or men can't do this, or women can't do this. And those things really stifle our range of development and expression. So I want to really be careful about, I try to not use those terms, and definitely try to not shame people into doing or not doing some construct.
Okay.
Thirdly, and where polarity comes in, is masculine and feminine. And so for you in a female body, you can be animated by both masculine and feminine energy. And me in a male body, I can be animated by both masculine and feminine. All okay, whatever I want to do. And where we have the sexual polarity and the attraction, that tension of opposites, is when one is animating a more masculine energy and the other one's animating a more feminine energy.
Yeah, so this element of the different energies, it can be fluid, right? Like it doesn't necessarily mean that the male always has to be in the masculine and the female always has to be in the feminine.
Correct.
Okay. So how would you describe the energy of the masculine and how would you describe the energy of feminine energy?
Sure. And again, we're saying, when we're describing these, they're saying like, you as a female, right, will be able to animate these particular energies in a moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the masculine energy, it tends to be associated with things like present direction, things like decisiveness, qualities like stillness, qualities like emptiness. There's an inherent drive in the masculine for freedom. There's an inherent like inclination to overcome obstacles. The masculine tends to grow through competition. So when you just think about a lot of sports and the energy inherent in that, there is that inherent drive to overcome obstacles and break through and experience this release and freedom. Okay. So you also can think about the genitalia. So the masculine penis becomes erect, right? So when he's in alignment and integrity, and when he's feeling vital and potent and on point, right? Or directed or penetrating or potent or initiatory, like those are sort of masculine qualities that a male or female can embody.
Okay.
Okay. And then if we think about the feminine, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I was curious. The one word that surprised me that was a descriptor of the masculine energy is this energy of freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we explore the feminine energy, it'll be interesting to see the difference between these two. But yeah, I think the structure, the direction, the decisiveness, I think that's a really powerful energy that many women can be tapping into to create more balance instead of being extremely flowy and extremely yeah, I think that the decisiveness could be a really powerful piece for women to bring in. And it's interesting because as I say that, there's so many different things that influence the ability to be decisive as a woman, whether it's self-doubt or people pleasing or perfectionism or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just that easy to tap into
No,
decisiveness for a woman. There's a lot of things
no.
that might block her from doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that piece of decisiveness is something that is maybe one of the more challenging elements of the masculine for women to tap
Mm-hmm.
into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a challenging quality for all humans as well. I think it's one of the things that I really often work with male clients on too, but it's something that really affects trustability.
I was just going to say that it feels like something that's more rooted in self-trust.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Before, like, I think it's useful to speak to that before we go into the feminine qualities. I do role playing with this around with couples. Like, so I think there's a way for a male to do it like a caveman and be more self-absorbed and say, this is what we're doing. Okay. Time and a place where that's hot, but usually she, and again, we're speaking in generalities, because you could still, like, you could have a bisexual couple and one tends to animate more masculine, the other one tends to animate more feminine, or you could have a bisexual couple and then they switch back and forth, or you could have a heterosexual couple. What we're talking about today is going to be more so heterosexual, but I want to say that the principles would apply. I have a male homosexual friend, and like, I love, we meet for coffee periodically, and I love kind of talking about this stuff and in relationships and the differences and the similarities. I think it's really fascinating.
Mm.
Anyway, so there's a caveman style of like, we're doing this, right? And then there's a self-absorption, and he doesn't really consider her. So he's kind of treating her like an object, or he's just aware of what he wants. And then there's a way in which he can sort of like, I don't care, dear, whatever you want to do, right? And sort of like, he loses himself, and then he forces her to be in that kind of driver's seat and decision-making role. And so what I have done is done a lot of experiential workshops where I'll have people play in different roles and scenarios, and then I'll get them to dialogue about it and share what's felt best. So a lot of my learning has been actually asking people what their experience and preference is once they're able to taste the possibilities. And I think there's an emergent truth that comes out of that, rather than stamping on this is how it is. But it does, while there are certainly outliers, there does tend to be, like, most people tend to prefer this. So I think that's interesting. So what, in that example, what couples often prefer is if whoever's animating the masculine more let's say let's say they've been hanging out for the afternoon, they're on a date, they've been hanging out for the afternoon, and he notices they're both getting hungry. So he's aware of that. He says, hey, I'm getting hungry. How about you? Right? So he's checking in. There's a collaboration. She says, yes. He's like, how about this new restaurant on da-da-da, right? And then she's like, yeah, we could. And he's attuned that that's like for her. And so he quickly then provides another solution. Oh, how about that Thai place? She's like, yes, that would be great. And so she, through her responsiveness and expressiveness, like, gives her yes. And then he reads that. And then he's driving the both of them there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of a collaborative decision-making, but he's still initiating and presenting the solution, and then attuning to how that feels for both of them.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. So yeah, even just within that one piece of decisiveness can be done from, I think, even like more of like a conscious, aware, present
Right.
space of reading their partner,
Right.
and versus just this, like, when you're maybe on your own and you're deciding where to eat, you're like, I'll go there, but not really incorporating the other person. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to say one other thing, then we'll have them also test, like, okay, so the guy says 4 options. And then you just see, like, she tends to kind of get overwhelmed, right? Whereas when he says 1 at a time and she feels that, then like that's a clearer way. That tends to be what people prefer. So that requires him to be able to slow down his mind enough and kind of relax into his ground and his breath to be able to offer one possible solution and see how that lands.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love that. Awesome. So how about the feminine energy? How would you describe that?
I can, and I'm curious to hear how you describe.
Yeah. So for me, the way that I would describe the feminine is fluid and creative. I would describe her as intuitive. That would probably be like the number one element that I would really classify or relate to when I think of the feminine, is very intuitive, in touch with her emotions, in touch with energy around her, or like we're using the word her, but that's what I feel the feminine energy
Yeah.
is, which we can all have access to, right?
Yeah.
Also, some of the elements of the feminine that I would say is wild and unpredictable in many ways, and for me, that's how it shows up. How it shows up is having a million different thoughts at once and being able to go from one to the other, and I think that's where the confusion around, not confusion, but the idea around like the masculine being free, like those two, the masculine having freedom and the feminine having the wild, feel like they're very similar energies, just in the different perspectives. Yeah, those are the main ones that come to mind. Embodied feels like feminine.
Agreed with all those. I would also, how about receptivity?
Yes, definitely.
Flow, you said fluid flow, flowing, feeling, um, loving, relational. And so, let's make a distinction. So like all humans, like I think it's useful that all humans go towards being more loving. I think it's all humans have parts of them that want to be free. So we don't want to say, like, we don't want to be rigid or absolutist and say like, no, this is only on this side and you can't do the other one. Like, I think it's important that there's a certain point in the developmental process where we are realizing we want to integrate the opposite qualities. And so that's helpful for both our soul development, but also our skillfulness in the world. And then regardless of what our profession is, then people often say, yeah, but when I come home at night, I would rather be in my essence, which is to say, I can do the other things, but the way that the energy naturally tends to animate me, it like people tend to have a preference of what feels more natural and easeful for them. And I think that's where you get into the polarity with the partner who has the opposite.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great way to look at how does this practically show up in relationship. And for me, I really got to a space before being in this relationship of sovereignty where like I could use my masculine and feminine, and I could do what I needed to, and I could be in my masculine and feminine and take care of things. Yet at some point that felt like it would be really nice to not always be doing everything, and to be able to relax into my feminine at the end of the day and not have to be in my masculine at work and then also flex that at night and having to be in my masculine taking care of everything.
Great example.
Yeah.
Really practical.
Yeah. So there's a evolution of the masculine, which I think that would be really powerful for you to speak to of, and when we talk about the evolution of the masculine, do you talk about more, are we talking about like the evolution of men, or are you talking more about like the evolution of masculine energy?
Great distinction. So, David Deida, Deida, was along with Alison Armstrong, along with John Gray, with the last 20 and 30 years, those three people were really some of the pioneers in masculine and feminine and polarity. David Deida particularly held it in a more developmental context, and he added spiritual development as part of that. So one of the really useful thing, again, John Gray and Alison Armstrong's work is really profound and useful. One of the things I really appreciate about David Deida is he particularly worked with people that kept growing and had a spiritual practice. So he was interested in the developmental arc over time. I facilitated men's groups for 9 years, and it was very much inspired by that work. Did a bunch of training about a decade ago. And so he uses a term called essence and shells. And so that is a sense of like, so when a teen boy, like, he's often starting, his masculine energy is coming online. And so he's learning to hone and channel and mature and master that energy. Um, but definitely myself included, like, you know, I was learning, and there were ways in which it was getting acted out unconsciously, but I kept going. And then, so the first stage is that, in both men and women. And the second stage, then, if a male keeps going, then at a certain point you realize he needs to integrate his feminine energy, right? So he starts, like, I grew my hair long, and I really, you know, started to kind of travel the world, and I was getting more authentic and getting, you know, getting more connection and community, and being more fluid instead of rigid. And so that was an important kind of um, part of my development. And I remember walking down the street in India one day. I was like traveling the world for 6 months, and I just had this like flashback, like, you know, I used to play football and getting in fights, and like this drive and this power and this animation in the world. And I'd realized that I had, in, you know, the last few years of sort of developing these other aspects, I've kind of lost that. Um, and so then there was this process of reintegrating my anger in a healthy way, and doing some deeper healing, and reintegrating my power, and in reconnecting with the wild man inside, and really getting into nature and getting into my physicality, and, you know, doing martial arts and boxing, and really like letting these, paving the way for some of these healthier expressions to evolve. Because I think in your question of like, what does evolutionary look like? So when the energies are young, they can act out, be self-absorbed, they can be harming, they can look at the earth and other women, and want to conquer and conquest. And so then the next step is they tend to see like, oh wow, that's not good, and I want to be harmed. And then there's an easy move to like disowning those things. But we're stopping ourselves from our full essence, because, like, for example, I think people think about it in terms of an either or, like, oh, I can be powerful, but then that's harmful to people, so I disown that, right? But that's really inhibiting my functionality in the world, my expression of my purpose and mission at work, and really my full potency and passion and power in the bedroom with my partner. So there's a certain point where I need to just integrate the power, which feels like this column, like, you know, force, but then open my heart. So when I put love with power, it not only does it feel good and activate the greater range of my potential, but it's super sexy to my partner, and it's more trustable, actually.
Mm.
So that's the
I,
difference.
yeah, I think that was so fascinating how you talked about almost like this pendulum swing of going from this football, powerful, more aggressive type of energy in some places to then really shifting to the opposite of traveling and freedom and love and emotion. And I actually find this is almost essential when I work with women who are specifically in their masculine all the time at work, and always constantly in the directional or
Mm-hmm.
structure, and
Mm-hmm.
even in the way that they dress and the way that they move throughout the world. And sometimes when we start to work together, they end up exploring this other end of the range of what does it feel like to actually let my emotions come out. And sometimes that can
Mm-hmm.
be overwhelming at first because they haven't
Mm-hmm.
done it for so long, and they swing all the way to this element of exploring their feminine. And I actually think that's a really important experience to see what it feels like to be all the way on the other side before you come
Mm-hmm.
back to the center. And I think that's with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different elements of personal development. We have to like be in that exploratory phase before we can integrate all of it in a way that actually serves us and the people around us.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
100%. And so in David Data's model, there's 3 stages. And
Mm-hmm.
so he would say that the female goes first from her sort of younger feminine into independent career woman. I don't need a man. And so that's kind of what you're describing. But then there's a move where if she has a feminine essence, she realizes she can do those, and she may want to express those in the world at work. But then her essence is actually love and flow. And so for a woman whose essence is feminine, sometimes there's can be a disorienting move as she goes from the second to the third stage, and she's learning about surrender, and she's learning about softening, and she's learning about trusting a competent lead, and she's learning about um, self-love and deeply loving herself, others, and all of life. And she's the surrender is not only in the context, like maybe sexually or with a partner, but it's also really surrendering the personal self and opening as all. And so it's a really powerful rite of passage for a woman as she's going from that second to the third stage.
Beautiful. I love how you describe those phases. And again, I think that having these frameworks is really supportive, because having, especially for a lot of the women that I work with, having the logical and even for me, having some type of scientific understanding of what happens when you're meditating or how to
Sure.
actually
Yeah,
implement these into our life. Sometimes we have to have that grounded framework versus it being super spiritual in the sense
for sure.
of um, philosophical
For
or
sure.
yeah. So I love that you bring those in. That's super helpful.
I also feel like it's helpful to be just clear, like, okay, do this now. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's super simple. I can totally do that instead of this nebulous. Sometimes personal development could be super nebulous and abstract. So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say, so commonly for the move from the men who have gotten to there's a derogatory term for this phase of the developmental process is like snags, soft new age guys, or which I think a lot of us have been in that process, but we just need to keep going, right? So for a lot of them, it's important for them to reconnect with, integrate their healthy anger and not either suppress it nor have it come out as aggression, to be able to really host their anger and fire and power and use it for good, or be able to verbally express themselves and stay in heart connection even when they're feeling triggered. It's important for men to work with shame, because unconsciously a lot of men use aggression to protect themselves when they are feeling shame. So during that second phase is really when it's important for them to develop emotional intelligence and be able to work with that and clear some of the past shame that has them be so reactive and aggressive, even at the tiniest things especially with their partner. It's important for them in that process of integrating their anger to reintegrate their power, but do so in a way that I can be empowered and I want you to be empowered too. Whereas in the past, it's either disown power or dominate in power over others. And so I think that's a really important move for them in terms of mutual empowerment. A third thing is often it's helpful for guys to reconnect to nature and reconnect with their wild man. I think over the last few hundred years, we've really, as a collective, in the unhealthy masculine, kind of gone to trying to control nature or not respect it and really not living sustainably. So some guys find that getting out into nature and reconnecting with their wild men and developing respect for, the big feminine in nature is a really powerful move for them. And then another thing that they really need to do is own their integrity and start to really honor the sacredness of their word and understand how much that's important for their partner to be able to trust them and relax in their presence. So owning their integrity. And then really presence. Often men will develop a meditation practice because they realize like there's a quality of their essence that's unwavering stillness. And so by deepening in that meditation practice, they can really sort of allow the sort of the divine masculine qualities to inhabit them more.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the specifically around shame and how usually underneath shame, or when shame's not addressed, there can be these other habits or protection mechanisms that can come out. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you
We
so
really,
much. Go ahead.
yeah, I want to just say like in men's groups and in groups of men and women, I really work a lot with states, as I mentioned. And so we'll get into states where we'll have somebody like, we'll have a woman feeling sadness. And then the guy will like be across from her. And there's a music on, so it's really enhancing the state. And then he gets to presence his authentic reaction. So some guys will, try to either shut down or they'll try to like, you know, like, oh, cheer her up. Oh, it's going to be okay. It's not that bad, and then so we'll pause it there and then they'll get to dialogue about that. Usually she's either really annoyed, frustrated, or disappointed. And so then we'll do a round two. She'll give him a little feedback and they'll do round two. And he's just breathing there. He's standing strong and grounded. His heart's open. There's a certain point where he may empathize and say, I imagine you feel sad. But he's not fixing it. He's just breathing. And then it's amazing how quickly with that presence, she's able to feel release and then they open into connection. And so just working with all kinds of different states like that, I find is really helpful for the embodiment of being able to, relate with each other in presence.
Yeah, it sounds like the role playing of it and getting to experience it in relation to someone, whether it's of the opposite sex or even just with someone who can help to reflect back
Yeah,
how it's being portrayed externally is really powerful.
totally.
So
Or to find
people,
the places where we shut down. So anger is another big one. So we would have guys, one guy's animating, they're paired up against a partner, and one guy's animating anger, and then the other guy notices what happens. Well, he might contract into a child state where his mom and dad were doing that. And so then we'll have kind of facilitators come around, help his system feel and release that and open back up. So he can get to this place where he stays adult, he stays open and untriggered, and he can skillfully help this other person find their center again and sort of de-escalate the intensity. But without that, there's often a collapse that happens because the younger states are kind of just triggered by that. So by helping people move through that, then all of a sudden they can stand in the face of anger and then skillfully kind of kind of work it down.
mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing so much depth and understanding to a topic that can be very, I don't want to say surface because polarity is not surface, but again, it's the intellectualizing versus the embodiment of it and actually integrating it into your life. So thank you for bringing this conversation
Yeah,
into a deeper level and showing what's available for people who want to go deeper into this work.
totally. And that's a good point. You're welcome. And I would also say, it's all good, like it's all useful, but I think beginning personal development, they'll have workshops where they'll have people like hitting pillows or like using a bat and whacking stuff. And I think that's really good to dislodge some of the suppressed anger and suppressed energy, but that's not so useful for my partner, right? Like I don't want to, like that's not the energy that I want to bring to them. So I think that's a first step, but then the other step is then practicing in dyadic, group container formats where like I can actually practice being with the energy and intensity of anger in myself and using my breath to not dump it on my partner and be able to host it and feel it and release it without going to aggression, without going into attack or shaming. And so there's a developmental process to kind of working with anger. And I'm really grateful to be alive during these times when there's so many tools and so many experiential workshops that we can do to help ourselves heal and evolve and open and then come back to that place of joy that we talked about at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. So, where can people continue learning from you, people who want to go deeper into this work? And what is it that you have, anything that you want to share with my community?
Thank you for listening and being interested in such topics. I feel like we're alive at a really precious time, a time of a lot of healing and development and evolution, and also a time where the masculine and feminine in our world are really evolving. I want to personally thank the feminine for the last few hundred years, where unfortunately it wasn't always safe or there was suppressive forces from the masculine. And so I want to thank you for gathering together in groups and for all the healers and mystics who are unfortunately misinterpreted as witches, but all of you for the last few hundred years who've been paving the way for what is a time now when the Dalai Lama says the Western woman will save the world. And I really believe the divine feminine right now is rising up, and our world needs that just as much as the masculine is just beginning to start to do some more development. There are some good men in the world, and may that continue. So I want to just like presence that process.
I think that's really powerful because there's so many women who are really seeking that in men who want to have good men, and in a sense that they're not in that space of like being too soft or
Mm-hmm.
but really the integrated masculine that you're talking about, I think that's really what a lot of women are seeking and
Mm-hmm.
waiting for, like not willing to settle until that is
Mm-hmm.
present because they know that
Yes,
they're
please.
worthy of that. So
Yes,
thank you.
yes,
And I believe that
yes.
you have a video online that if people want to learn a little bit more, something that you created a while back, you said she wants to feel you. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. A couple years ago, there was a poem that I just wrote one day. It just kind of streamed out after meditation one morning. It was called "She Wants to Feel You, Man." And we ended up turning it into video, and I think it really spoke to the evolving masculine, and then that relationship between the masculine and beautiful relationship with the masculine and feminine, and then the art and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but in terms of what was happening inside here in the creation was for guys to realize all of those people who've been asking you to grow, whether it's your parents or coaches and mentors or your wife or girlfriend, like they're really the universe in disguise, using those people as emissaries to help inspire you to be your best self. So even if the development first starts because your wife is asking you, like, may you continue until that becomes a stream from your own soul, that you understand that there's part of the point of life is for you to approach your best self. So that for me, that was a layer in the video. So
Amazing.
you can include that in the
Yeah.
link there.
Yeah, I'll include that in your book, and then also a couple of the other resources that you shared, Alison Armstrong and David Data, and
Mm-hmm.
some good resources that you shared today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, what a joy. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.